Imagine boarding a luxury cruise ship for a relaxing vacation across the Mediterranean. Music is playing, the sea is calm, and hundreds of passengers are celebrating the start of what should have been a perfect journey. Families are taking photos on the deck, couples are leaning over the rails, and waiters are moving through the lounges with trays of drinks. Everything feels normal. Everything feels safe. Now imagine waking up the next morning and discovering that everyone on the ship is gone. Not one passenger, not one crew member, just an empty vessel drifting across open water as if nothing at all had happened. That is the nightmare at the center of this story. A cruise ship disappearance so unsettling that it still feels impossible even years later. People have compared it to the darkest, real cruise ship disappearance cases, the kind of disappearance at sea stories that spread because they touch a very deep fear. You are surrounded by water, far from land, and when something goes wrong, there is nowhere to run. The vessel was called the Ocean Empress, a massive luxury liner carrying around 600 passengers and nearly 200 crew members. It had departed from Barcelona on a 7-day trip that promised sunshine, fine dining, and smooth sailing through some of the most beautiful waters in Europe. There were honeymooners, retired couples, solo travelers, groups of friends, and families with children who had spent months planning for this vacation. Among them was a newly married couple, Daniel and Maria, who had booked the cruise as their honeymoon escape. Friends said they looked happy, relaxed, and excited for the days ahead. Nothing about the passenger list suggested danger. Nothing about the route suggested trouble. It was supposed to be another routine voyage. But by the time the ship was found again, the Ocean Empress had turned into the center of one of the strangest cruise ship mysteries ever imagined. The first day passed without incident. Passengers spent the afternoon at the pool, walked the decks at sunset, and packed the dining halls for dinner. That evening, a live band played in the main lounge, while guests laughed over cocktails and dessert. Staff members later said the atmosphere felt light and cheerful. Security reports from that night showed no fights, no emergencies, and no signs of panic anywhere on board. If anything, it was a quiet night. That is what makes the next part so disturbing. Sometime after midnight, the ship simply disappeared at sea from radar. At first, authorities did not panic. Temporary signal loss happens, weather interference happens, technical errors happen. But when several hours passed with no restored contact, concern began to rise. Then, just after sunrise, local fishermen spotted the ship drifting far off its expected course. It was moving slowly, almost aimlessly, but still upright and apparently undamaged. When rescue crews finally boarded the vessel, they expected to find an engine failure, a communications issue, or perhaps an abandoned ship after some kind of evacuation. Instead, they entered a scene so eerie that seasoned investigators struggled to describe it. The ship was silent. Passenger cabins were open, but empty. Luggage sat near the beds. Shoes were on the floor. Phones, wallets, jewelry, and passports remained inside the rooms. In the dining areas, glasses still held melted ice. Half-finished meals sat untouched. In some cabins, televisions were still on. It looked as though people had stepped away for a moment and never come back. There were no signs of damage, no sign of a storm, and no sign of violence. It was this detail that pushed the case into something far beyond an ordinary maritime emergency. This was starting to look like the ultimate overnight cruise ship disappearance, the kind people whisper about when discussing missing passengers on cruise ships and passengers who disappeared overnight on cruise ships. Search teams moved through every level of the Ocean Empress, from the engine room to the highest deck. They checked storage areas, kitchens, staff quarters, maintenance corridors, and locked service rooms. Nothing. Not one passenger. Not one member of the crew. The lifeboats were still attached to the ship, which immediately ruled out the simplest explanation. If there had been an evacuation, it had not happened through official procedures. The emergency alarm system also showed no sign of activation. There was no distress call sent to nearby authorities. The ship's radio logs were quiet. It was as if 800 people had vanished between midnight and dawn without triggering a single warning. The honeymoon suite used by Daniel and Maria became one of the most talked about details in the investigation. Their cabin looked untouched. Their bags were packed, their clothes were hanging, and their personal items were neatly in place. For many people following the case, they became the face of the mystery. Another haunting example attached to the phrase "couple disappeared on cruise ship." Investigators soon focused on the ship's security system, hoping cameras would explain what happened. Instead, they found another disturbing twist. Several cameras had gone offline shortly after midnight. Others were still running, but showed long stretches of empty hallways, dim stairwells, and deserted lounge areas. No stampede, no struggle, no evacuation line, no obvious suspect moving from deck to deck. There were also no signs that another vessel had approached during the night. According to the ship's navigation records, the Ocean Empress had continued moving normally for hours, maintaining a steady course before slowly drifting away from its route. That fact destroyed many early theories. Pirates usually leave evidence. Mechanical disasters leave chaos. Panic leaves damage. Yet the ship looked calm, almost preserved, as though time had frozen the moment everyone disappeared. That eerie stillness is why people still refer to it as a mysterious cruise ship disappearance at sea, rather than just another lost vessel. As news of the case spread, speculation exploded. Some believed a coordinated hijacking had taken place, turning the incident into one of the most baffling crimes at sea ever discussed. Others argued that the passengers must have been transferred to another ship under cover of darkness. But no nearby ship reported unusual activity, and no satellite images captured another vessel close enough to carry out something that large. There were theories about poison gas, mass hallucination, cult behavior, and even secret government involvement. Each theory sounded dramatic, but each one collapsed under scrutiny. There were no bodies in the water, no debris trail, no mass emergency message, no financial ransom demand, no evidence of a pirate boarding, and perhaps most chilling of all, no trace of any of the missing people ever surfaced on land. For a case so massive, the complete absence of follow-up evidence was almost impossible to understand. Over time, the Ocean Empress joined the catalog of stories people cite when discussing vanished-at-sea tragedies, unsolved cruise ship disappearance files, and real-life cruise ship disappearance stories that refuse to fade away. It also revived older fears about people who vanished from cruise cabins and the wider subject of disappearances on ferries and passenger vessels around the world. The ocean has always hidden answers well, but this case felt different because of its scale. Hundreds of people do not simply disappear without leaving behind a trail. Yet that is exactly what seemed to happen here. Search operations lasted for days, then weeks. Coast Guards expanded the radius. Investigators interviewed families, studied crew backgrounds, and checked international ports. Nothing meaningful emerged. No confirmed sightings, no survivors, no explanation strong enough to hold. And that is why the story of the Ocean Empress still feels so disturbing. One moment it was full of life, music, conversation, and movement. The next, it was an empty shell gliding over dark water. It remains the kind of true crime cruise ship disappearance story that keeps people awake because it violates every expectation of how the world is supposed to work. Ships can sink, ships can burn, ships can be attacked, but a ship full of people should not reappear empty. 600 passengers boarded that vessel, expecting memories, laughter, and safe return. Instead, they became part of one of the darkest cruise ship disappearance cases ever told. Somewhere between midnight and sunrise, they were lost at sea, and whatever happened in those hours remains hidden by silence, distance, and the sea itself. Even now, when people revisit the file, the same question keeps returning. What force could erase hundreds of lives without a sound, without a signal, and without a single witness? Until that answer appears, the Ocean Empress will remain not just a mystery, but a warning written across open water that no one has ever fully understood.